Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm just going to wait a minute here and let everybody go ahead and get started or join us here on our link. I hope everybody's having a good Sunday and enjoying the conference so far. I'm going to be taking us through a presentation today where hopefully you will walk away with some good nuggets that will kind of help you in your own grief journey. For those of you who don't know me, I am Emily Graham. I'm both a bereaved mom and a grief coach at After Child Loss. And if you've got any questions, if you're joining us live today, feel free to pop those into the chat. I will be doing my best to monitor that, kind of make sure that I'm answering your questions and responding throughout our conversation this morning. If you are here and you're watching us live, share the name of your child. I know how hard it is on this journey. And when you are in this grief community, it's really important to remember them, say their name. So feel free to share it with us in the chat so we can all kind of read through it and remember them with you. Today, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the things that we need to know in order to survive child loss. And I know the title of this says the one thing, and it makes it sound really, really simple. And just like the one thing, right? If we could do that and make it all go away, that would be perfect. But the truth is, there's not just one thing, right? In fact, there are so many things that we end up learning and that we need to learn as we're going along this journey. And we can't fit all of those things into the next hour. So my hope today is that you are going to walk away knowing as many of these things as possible, because I know how hard this journey is. As a grief coach, I do my best to really try to meet people exactly where they are, with no expectations. And I try to provide as many helpful things as I can that will really help them continue taking steps forward. And that's really what our goal is, right? We need to keep taking steps forward. The best place for us to start today is really just with sharing a little bit of my story. I believe sharing our stories are incredibly powerful. I know that telling my story has really brought way more connection to my life than anything else that I have ever talked about before. And I hope that you guys feel the same way about telling your stories. I know it's really hard to tell your stories early on. Hi, Christy. Hi, Nicole. Good to see you guys. So what I want to talk about this morning, like anything, right? Child loss is a really big deal. And because I want to, when I started this journey, I just wanted to isolate. I just wanted to withdraw. I just wanted to be alone. And this is a really lonely place to be. And it feels a lot of times like there is absolutely nobody out there who possibly understands it or gets it. If I take you back to my story, we are going back to Christmas of 2015. My son Cameron was 7 years old, and leading up to Christmas Eve night, it was just like any other holiday, right? Our house was filled with laughter, chaos, excitement, joy, stress, right? As the kids were going off, getting ready for bed, I was gearing up for all of those last minute tasks, right? I needed to wrap. I needed to fill stockings. I was tucking all the gifts under the tree, and my goal was really to try to make everything perfect. And little did I know, perfect wasn't going to happen. My son woke up. He was sick. It was 11 p.m. And it wasn't the kind of sick that you think would end the way that it did, right? But he was sick enough that at 2 o'clock in the morning, we were loading him into the car and we were taking him to the ER for a visit. The events of that night were a complete medical mystery. He declined so rapidly that doctors and nurses couldn't stop saying, "I've never seen anything like it." And those aren't the words that any mom wants to hear, especially in that situation. By 10 a.m. that morning, I was being escorted into this tiny little conference room where the doctors told me there was nothing more they could do. My son had rapidly gone from sick to coma to brain hemorrhaging, organs shutting down to brain death. And all of that happened in just the span of a few hours. We withdrew life support just after midnight, and we ended our Christmas day living out every parent's worst nightmare, which was the death of our child. And I know that if you are here right now and you're listening, I know that it's because you've experienced loss, and it's likely because you've experienced the loss of your child. So you've got a pretty good idea of what life was like for us on December 26th, the beginning of new normal, right? I hated that phrase. I still hate that phrase. Picking up the pieces and figuring out how to live again after that was something I had zero interest in. I was years down the road before I really felt like I was in a place where I could start figuring this out. I had made attempts earlier on, right? But I really wasn't in the right space to do it. And I think that's a pretty normal thing that people need to know. It took such a long time, not only to reach that place mentally, where I really kind of wanted things to change or felt like I needed things to change, but then to go out and find the things that actually helped was an entirely different experience for me. I know that finding those things is critical to our success in being able to do this. And when they're sort of scattered all over the place, it takes way too much energy to go out and find them all and to try them. And a lot of times that's energy that we just don't have. The journey of finding the right tools really led me to where I am today. And I know that we need more people in the child loss space talking about the realities of losing a child and what it means to carry a grief like this every single day, to acknowledge all of the difficulties that we face when it comes to re entering life after our loss. I often talk about the importance of building a life that we can live. Because really, I felt disconnected from the life that I lived before, and we really have no idea how to move forward from this. In our early grief, we aren't physically able to function on a normal level, and we experience things like brain fog and an inability to focus or concentrate. We have sleep disturbances. We have appetite changes, panic attacks, right? Our anxiety goes through the roof. We end up in a state of deep sadness and depression. Emotional overwhelm is pretty normal, and even the inability to make decisions, even things as stupid as what am I going to eat for dinner tonight? And our mind is just completely consumed by thoughts of our loss. And even if you weren't there in their moments, in their final moments to witness all of that, your brain is going to fill in those blanks and it's going to help you imagine what that was like. And oftentimes, those things will play over and over and over again in your mind. We can't stop thinking about the fact that they're gone, right? And gone is a really empty, hopeless word. I'm guessing that everyone here can relate. And we feel crazy, right? Not only is everything in life feeling like it's completely out of control, but we feel out of control. And it's a really hard place to exist when that happens. Each parent stays in that space for a unique amount of time, right? There are no stages, there are no timelines. It just is. I'm going to pause here because I want to really call out the fact that this is one of the most important things. Whenever you are, wherever you're at in this journey, I want you to know that it's okay. If it's 6 weeks, if it's 6 years, if it's 20 years, I want you to know that you've done exactly what you need to do to get you to the place that you are today. And whatever that is, whatever you've done, that's okay. I also want you to know that even if you feel like you're doing this all wrong, or you can't do this, or you don't want to do this, I know that was the place that I was in for a really long time. Or maybe you have no idea how to do this. I want you to know that's completely normal. Today, I want you to walk away at least knowing that you can do this, because you already are. And every day is a brand new day. Every moment is a brand new moment that you can try something different, something that will help you maybe do this in a healthier way, in a more balanced way. And that's really what my goal is in helping people. This grief, I don't have to tell you guys, this grief is hard. And I wish that I had another word that would describe it. Um, but what I found is that language really doesn't do it justice. And in fact, language tends to completely fail us in all of this. We don't have the right words to describe this experience to someone else to help them understand. We don't even often have the words to make sense of it for ourselves. And typically, when someone hears the word grief, they just automatically assume we're sad, but it's way more than that. We actually experience a trauma reaction. Child loss is trauma, right? When your child died, when my son died, really big changes took place inside of our brain. And no one really talks about this part, which kind of blows my mind. What we experience and are still experiencing in varying degrees is emotional trauma. It's a brain injury. And the brain actually rewires the way that it works in an effort to protect us. And that's why we experience all of those physical symptoms that I mentioned earlier. Our brain's main job in all of this, or in life in general, is to protect us and keep us safe. And when we are in a really stressful state, like the loss of our child, our brain reads that as danger. And we start to release hormones into our system that essentially puts your body into a state of fight, flight, or freeze. And I'm sure you've heard people talk about this. It's the same exact response that your body would have if you were walking through the forest and you happened upon a mama grizzly bear and her baby cubs, right? Your body is going to move into survival mode. There's a lot of times people will joke about being in survival mode, but it's real. We literally are existing in that space. And there is not just a switch that we can turn off. Sure, there are things that we can do that can help us in those moments, but those aren't things that we're taught either. And trauma changes the way that we view the world. It really has a big impact on us. Every reminder, every thought that you have about your child, every conversation, every single thing that reminds you of your child or their death, you're re-triggered. And in that state, certain parts of your brain don't even function normally anymore. And that includes the front part of your brain, which is where all of your thinking takes place, right? The part of your brain where your emotions are regulated. It essentially goes offline and it's not even accessible to you. And so that explains why our emotions are off the charts, right? We go into hyperdrive. And the very center of your brain, which is the most primitive part, which is also your fear center, it kicks in overdrive and it takes over everything. I don't know if you've made the connection, or recognized just how much fear actually shows up in grief. Fear of forgetting, fear of living without your child, fear of your children or other loved ones dying. I know that's a big one. Fear of being asked certain questions like, how many children do you have? Fear of what other people might say or think or do in the moment that you might not be ready for. Fear of looking weak, right? If you are out somewhere and you get triggered and you're really emotional, breaking down and being judged and feeling vulnerable, like all eyes are on you. Those are all very common in this. All of that fear can really keep us stuck and withdrawn, and we can feel very out of control. I want you to just think for a second about your own experience and how much of your time is spent thinking about your child's death or focusing on the idea that they're gone. I know I hear people ruminate on that all the time. or how much you miss them, how much you wish that they were still here. I'm guessing that that's quite a bit of your time. If you're anything like me, that was probably 99.9% of my time, right? I was in that space solid for the first 9 months. And when I say 9 months, I don't say that to say there's a timeline. For me, that's when I was able to sort of lift my head enough out of the fog and look around. And I felt like that was the first time that I could really start to assess the damage. Because for some reason, in that deep grief state, I really didn't have the ability to see anything else that was going on. And at that moment, I wasn't better, right? I didn't stop grieving. I was simply regaining my awareness that there was life happening outside of my grief. And I became more functional over time, right? As that happens, the grief brain stuff, it doesn't go away. That trauma response doesn't go away. For the next 2 years, I probably spent 75 to 80% of my time there. And while that percentage can and does continue to decrease over time, it really feels like our brains never resume their former full function. It does continue to get better, but it doesn't just go back to normal. I often talk about our need to take our power back in this, right? Because so much of our power has been given away. And it isn't time that helps us do this. You have to want things to change. You have to be in a place where you are ready for things to change. And when you get to that place, there's work to do. And that's hard. We don't always have the energy for that. And we don't always know what the work is, right? It requires action. No one tells us that. We're just told to give it time, right? And then we're told to move on, right? But neither of those things are really helpful, and neither of those things are entirely true all on their own. I want to just pause here again for a brief second because I want to call out the fact that the next thing that I'm going to say is one of these really important things I want you to remember. There are things that you can do. There are things out there that will help you and can help you. And you have to want it, right? You have to be ready for it. You have to choose it. And you really have to go out and find what works for you. What I'm about to say often ruffles some feathers, especially for those in deep grief. So just stick with me as I say this. There is choice in this experience. And it does take a lot of time before that choice becomes apparent and we have the ability to access it. So if you don't feel choice yet, if you don't think that that's a possibility for you, that's okay. Just know that it does exist in this and it will open itself up to you when you're ready to access it. It is completely normal to feel like this was forced on you, right? And to see no choices available. But everything we do, everything we don't do, we've chosen it in some way. I don't ever say this as a way to judge you, right? I would never judge somebody else's journey in this. But there is some personal responsibility that we have to take when we're ready to take that. We are the only ones who can do anything about it. And this precise moment that we are in right now, it's a culmination of every single choice that we've made throughout our life, choices and non-choices, right? Sometimes we choose things because we want to. We know that it will help us. We feel good about it. And then sometimes we choose things inadvertently, which often looks more like not choosing it. And because we didn't have the ability or we didn't have the energy, maybe we didn't have the interest. And all of those reasons, again, they're okay, but recognize that it's still a choice to sort of lean into that and just sort of let things happen as they happen. As you move deeper into your grief journey and you get to the place where you can sort of lift your head out of the fog and take a look around and assess your damage, you will likely recognize that choice does show up, right? And you are able to reach a place where you can access it. We can't change this, right? We can't go back and change the outcome. There is absolutely nothing that we can do to bring our children back. We can't fix this, right? Grief is not something that can be fixed. But you do get to decide what comes next and how you respond and how you react in this moment. You are the only one that determines your quality of life going forward. So the question I'm often asked is, does this get easier? When does this get easier, right? That's the age-old question that everybody wants to know. And my response is not the same as what you're going to see in a typical grief community. My response is that yes, it can get easier if you want it to, and when you're ready for it. We don't stop grieving. We never stop grieving, but we can reach a place where that grief that we carry, it's not all consuming, right? It doesn't take over and hijack every single thing in our life. We can get to a place where we can carry this a little bit easier, and it doesn't feel as heavy as it does early on. So know that it changes and it evolves. It is okay if you're not ready. And you're going to hear me say this a lot during this presentation. Yet is a really important word. And train yourself to recognize that things do evolve and change, or they can over time. Just because something doesn't work for you today, just because it doesn't resonate with you today, does not mean that it won't help you later, or that it won't work for you later. I have a lot of people who tell me that the things that they do today that really provide the greatest sense of comfort and help them the most are things that if somebody had given it to them early on, they would have completely written it off. It would not have been something that they would have even tried, let alone would it have worked for them. So go find the things, keep looking, keep learning, keep an open mind. You never know when something will create even the smallest shift for you. While it might not seem like much, those things add up and they become really big shifts. I'm going to share with you one of my key learnings, and hopefully this will give you a place maybe that you can start on your own exploration. One of my biggest learnings that I've had is many of the things that are out there and exist today, they really create additional struggle for us. They really sort of set us up for failure. And these aren't necessarily things that we recognize are happening. But once we have the awareness that it's going on, we tend to really have our eyes wide open, right? And we can see things very differently and our perspective shifts. The first one is that society has in no way prepared us for grief. And 9 times out of 10, the people around us, they are not equipped to support us in our grief. And I'm sure you've felt that. I'm sure you've felt people take a step back and not be able to have the right words, not be able to show up in the ways that you want them to. And there's no judgment in that statement and saying that people aren't equipped to support us. It's just a fact. It's just the way that it is. We live in a world that is very grief illiterate. We don't talk about it. We don't acknowledge that it exists. We pretend that it only happens to other people. I know I thought it only happened to other people. We feel so incredibly uncomfortable that when grief is looking us in the face, we say and we do all the wrong things, right? Or we do nothing at all. And that's just the way that it works. It's not our fault. It's not their fault. These are just the things that have been conditioned into us by the world around us. This is what we've been taught to do. Not having experienced it, a lot of times people will just repeat everything that they've seen, everything that they've been told to say. And it's really hard in the moment not to fault them for that, but it's literally what's been taught to us. Well, many of these things that people say and do, they're said with the very best of intentions, right? Nobody sets out to hurt us in most cases. And a lot of the things that are said and done really aren't helpful. And again, sometimes can feel very hurtful. I know that I used to watch people after they had had a major loss. And this was before I lost my son, right? I would make all of these assumptions about them. And the ironic thing was, I would find myself watching other bereaved moms, right? Before I was one. For some reason, I was always drawn to a bereaved mother. And in my mind, I would see them out in a moment, right? And I would see them as living again. In my mind, they were so strong. They were picking up the pieces and they were really figuring out how to move on. And I never in a million years would have guessed that they were ruminating on their loss, right? Struggling just to show up in that moment, desperately trying to make it back to their car so that they could just fall apart. And we all know that's the reality, right? In my mind, they weren't even thinking about their loss at all, right? It wasn't even anything that was on their radar. And they were just in the moment and they were obviously enjoying it because that's what it looked like to me. They were doing so well that I didn't want to bring it up, right? I didn't want to acknowledge it because I was afraid I'd make them sad again. And Lord knows we don't want to go back to that, right? That's sort of the feeling. Knowing grief now, I see how flawed that thinking was. And I think we all sort of have that perspective shift. I now understand just how much of our experience is kept hidden away, right? Protected from judgment. I know how much we yearn for anyone to really see us, to try to understand our pain, or just to say their name. I have also found that society is a little bit toxic, and there's this constant push for positivity and happiness, and it's all the time, it's everywhere. There doesn't seem to be room for anything else. No one knows how to handle discomfort. All the things that are labeled negative, right? People don't have time for that. People aren't taught how to hold space for grief. The messages that we get over and over again, whether they're intentional or not, is that you aren't happy and positive, so there's something wrong with you. And I want you to know that's false. Every emotion that you feel in this experience is valid. Whether you assign that emotion a positive or a negative value, it's valid. And there's nothing wrong with you. You are simply grieving, and you're grieving probably the worst loss that you possibly can. Yet, all the messages that we get, everything that's sort of projected our way, we interpret it, and it feels like an attempt at somebody to fix us, right? Everyone has their idea of what we need, what we should or shouldn't do, what they think this should look like, or how we must feel. And I want you to know that should is a really bad word. If somebody has not told you this yet, every time that you hear the word should, whether it's somebody else or whether it's you using it, I want you to immediately put up a stop sign. It's a red flag. That word should tells us that that statement that we're hearing or that we're saying is someone else's expectation of us. Sometimes it's an expectation we're placing on ourselves that, again, we've been conditioned to think is the way that things should be. And so in that moment, I want you to train yourself to stop, and I want you to decide if that statement is really accurate and if it's really fair and if it's something that you truly believe needs to happen. There are a lot of messages, a lot of expectations out there that create struggle or cause us to struggle more. They will make us question what we need, how we feel, if it's normal, have we been here too long, right? You always hear that message of you need to move on. It's time. It's like the rest of the world is telling us that we're doing this all wrong. You cannot do grief wrong unless you are entirely avoiding it and not doing it all. You cannot do grief wrong. One of the greatest skills that we can learn in this is how to grieve. And that might seem like a really ridiculous thing to say, right? Because of course you know how to grieve. It just happens. And I've just told you that you can't do it wrong. And it's pretty automatic. Maybe the more accurate statement is that we need to learn how to grieve confidently. You would be surprised, maybe you wouldn't, at the number of people who reach out and ask the question, is this normal? And they tack that onto everything, right? Is this normal? And I can't tell you how many times people do that. And my answer is always the same. I always tell them, yes, whatever it is normal. And I want you to always assume everything you say, everything you think, everything you do is normal, because it is. Validating what you're feeling, knowing that those things are normal, that might be one of the most important things that you can do for yourself in early grief, right? Give yourself permission to feel and think and do whatever it is that feels right to you in the moment. When we assume that everything is normal, we stop judging it. And we can have more compassion for ourselves. We are better equipped to take care of ourselves. And when we doubt or when we feel pushback from the people who are around us, we question everything. Then we do the worst possible thing and we judge ourselves. And that judgment, that breeds negative thoughts, negative self-talk, and it really turns into this vicious cycle that we just continue to repeat. And again, we struggle, right? Learning about our grief, how it works, understanding it can really be empowering. And it gives us the opportunity to identify the ways that maybe we could do this in a little bit more healthy, a little more balanced way. And that can really be a game changer for people. While you're out there learning about your grief, I would also challenge you to expand your definition of self-care. Self-care is critical. I'm sure you've heard people say this. Self-care is self-love in its most basic form. And I know how hard it is to love yourself. I honestly question if I ever really loved myself before. And it's taken me years to get to a place where I can love myself now. And in this process, we lose our sense of self in this loss, right? A piece of us has died with our child, and we are suddenly tasked with figuring out who we are now and rediscovering ourselves. And that can be a really scary place to be in. And it's really hard to love yourself when you don't know who you are. I see the foundation of self-care as learning how to reconnect with yourself. It's about understanding what you're feeling, which can be really hard, what you need or what you want in this exact moment, and that's really hard. And then learning how to follow through on it and breaking all those habits that we have of just ignoring it or not doing it. And I know all of that is so much easier said than done. Self-care isn't always about just choosing the things that we think will be good for us. Sometimes it doesn't look the way that we might expect it to look. And we find ourselves saying that, say no to the things that we think that we should do. I recently had a mom who told me that she was so disappointed in herself because she couldn't get it together. And she went on to explain that her aunt had died, and it was only a few months after she lost her son. And she was all set to go to the funeral. And in her mind, she was doing this. She was going to support her cousins. This is what had to happen, right? This is what she would have done any other time. And she really felt it was the right thing to do. So the night before, she's getting food ready. She's getting herself ready. She's doing all the things that she needs to do. And she realizes the day of she goes into emotional overwhelm, right? She cannot bring herself to go. Her anxiety was through the roof, right? She's freaking out. She was in a really bad place, and so bad, she physically couldn't get in the car and leave and go to the funeral. In her mind, she had completely failed, right? Not going was a failure. And what I did was I sort of stepped back and said to her, the measurement tool that you are using to determine whether you are successful or whether you're a failure, it's not an accurate tool. And really, what she was doing was trying to hold herself up against all those old, conditioned, flawed ways of thinking, right? Those old expectations that were given, the standards that were taught before loss, the ones where you suck it up, right? You go and you do it anyway. The feeling and the pressure that you have to be there, right? That overrides everything else. It's what everybody expects you to do. And so you put a smile on your face and you go out and you do it, even if you're not happy about it. You say you're fine when you're not fine, right? These are all things that we have been conditioned to do. You do these things, even if you're not in a place where you mentally have the ability to do them. Your feelings don't matter, right? They should just be shoved aside for the afternoon. And that's essentially what we've been taught to do. If you think about it, there's some really toxic stuff in there. And that is all stuff that society reinforces and that we reinforce for ourselves until we have that awareness and we can kind of break that cycle. Instead, what I did was I reframed it to her. I explained to her that I saw her decision to stay home and not attend the funeral as a brave act of self care. And her loss was still so fresh, and forcing herself into a funeral, into that situation only months after burying her son, that was obviously bringing up a lot of trauma for her. And it makes sense. Of course, it would bring up trauma, right? And so for her, I wanted her to recognize that that was traumatic and everything she was experiencing completely made sense. I also explained to her that there are things that she could do, right, that would help them, that would support them long after the funeral. We all know everybody disappears, right? We need to know that we can show up for people in different ways. And being the person who shows up weeks or months down the road is way more helpful to somebody than being there at the actual event. I also explained to her that the self-care that's required when you lose a child, it isn't what we think of as self-care, right? We used to think of self-care as a trip to the spa, getting our nails done, right? A girl's trip for the weekend, a hot shower, right? We need to recognize that self-care in grief is so much bigger than that. And we need to know we aren't in the right headspace to do some of these things, right? So, not doing them is typically the right decision for us in the moment, even if we feel pressured to, even if we feel like we're making the wrong decision. It's about having the ability to recognize that this is going to do more harm than good, right? And we need to have compassion for ourselves and give ourselves grace that it's okay to say no. Um, Self care and saying no, right, to all of these things that you feel like you should do. These are all the things that we don't have energy for right now. Sometimes it's people, sometimes it's places, sometimes it's experiences, and eliminating sources of drama, stress in our lives, making it easier for us to show up in life. That's really what we need to focus on. It's about setting up boundaries, right? It's about protecting our energy, protecting our headspace. We need to make sure that we are in a place that we can handle all of the things that life throws at us. And life keeps sending stuff our way, right? It's not just the loss of our child. You have everything else that's coming at you as well. And we all know that it does not take much for us to reach a state where we are really flustered, we're overwhelmed. And the things that we used to be able to handle that we never gave a second thought to, Those are things now that can literally bring us to our knees. So by saying yes to these things, we're actually betraying our own needs and placing everybody else's needs and well-being ahead of our own. Um, while the choice may feel selfish, self-care isn't selfish. And you can't help others if you are depleted of all of your resources. You are of no use to anyone else when you are in a really overwhelmed state. I'm sure you know the saying, we can't pour from an empty cup. And you really have to learn how to make yourself that priority and make that okay. We've been conditioned all of our lives to betray our own needs and to shrink ourselves to make other people happy. And it's a really toxic skill that we need to unlearn. I've found this journey is all about unlearning those toxic things, right? All those unhelpful beliefs that I carried, figuring out how to release all of those expectations, the pressures that we feel, the guilt, the shame, right? Because we've been through enough. I have a saying that I always reference, and I'm sure that you've heard people say, there's no I in team. I like to say there is an I in grief, and that I is right at the very center. And that means that grief is all about you. You are the only thing that is important, and putting yourself first is the only thing that will help you pull yourself out of the depths and really figure out how to do this. For me, it became about the people living inside my home, right? My husband, my two daughters, we became the most important thing. And in almost all cases, I didn't have the energy for anything else for a really long time. You have to learn how to discern when you give and how much of yourself you're willing to give, and then be okay creating that boundary and just saying no. You are likely going to feel pushback. You're going to feel pressure from people around you, especially as you start showing up different in life, not the way that people expect you to show up. And sometimes that pressure is real. And sometimes that pressure is all in our head. Um, remember that you've been through the most traumatic thing, and it's life changing. And I know that it sounds really crazy, but I had to remind myself of that a lot. I had to constantly validate in my head the reality. Um, and I wasn't always good at doing that. When the world around you doesn't seem to understand what it is that you're going through, it's up to you to recognize what's happening, to acknowledge what you're going through, um, to notice your needs, right, and advocate for them, and then release whatever expectations, whatever else that is that doesn't align to your needs and it doesn't support you, and hold firm in your decision in doing that, making your choices. In Cameron's final hours, I remember trying to imagine what this life would be like without him. And I guess it was my way of trying to prepare myself for what was coming. And as you guys know, there is nothing that can prepare us. What I imagined in those moments, as harsh as they were, it didn't begin to touch the reality of what it felt like living it. I didn't expect the level of devastation, the trauma, the loss of identity, the complete disconnection from my life. As all of you know, when you end up in a place like that, things get really dark. Our thoughts turn ugly. Our reactions to the world around us are really harsh. Anger often finds its way in. I know I had a lot of anger, and it was really out of character because we do feel out of control. I also remember wanting my life on the outside to look as broken as it felt on the inside. And I would imagine all of the things that I could do to make that happen. Our choices are easily made in this state because we are in the depths of despair. And once we enter that place, it feels like we can never return. But those are lies that we tell ourselves. And I want you to know that it's okay when things go dark. And it's okay if they go dark for a long time, longer than people might think they should. It is possible to find your way out of that darkness. You have the power to do that. You may just need a little bit of help. You might be missing the right tools and support. I can't tell you how many times another parent has reached out to me and said, I feel so alone, right? No one understands what I'm going through. I have no idea what comes next. I get it. And you know what? When somebody else gets it, that's a beautiful thing. It can really change everything. It can take away some of the pain that you're carrying in the moment, knowing that you're not alone, even though you might feel like you are. And another reality that's important is that our children are not gone. They still exist. I know I'm still very connected to my son, and my relationship with him continues. I used to think that by staying in that pain of early grief, that I was staying connected to him. What I realized was that all of the things that I was doing was really just honoring the fact that he died. And I was letting his death be the defining moment, not his life. I was so afraid, though, of what it meant if that pain wasn't there. To me, that meant that his death didn't affect me enough, right? That I didn't love him enough or that I was forgetting him. And what I found is that none of that is true. I promise you that disconnecting from this pain in no way means that you're moving away from them. I had a lot of fear around that idea, and it held me back for a really long time. I've actually found it to be the opposite. By releasing some of the painful parts and getting rid of or healing what I could, I was better equipped to reconnect with my son in another way. And by doing that, I was learning how to honor his life. In order to make those changes to reach that place, I had to turn everything on its side. I had to find a new way of doing this grief. And for a long time, I played the game of fake it till you make it, right? I went through the motions of our old life, hoping that at some point it would feel normal. That didn't work. I had to think outside the box. I had to really find a new way. And there is so much about this experience that isn't mainstream. I say that because a core piece of my journey involved the need to find my child in the state that he's in now. And I know a lot of parents understand that. It's surprisingly a fairly common thing, although nobody talks about it. I started to experience things really early on, right? Signs and things that I just couldn't explain any other way than him still being here, him still being very present. I spent a lot of time reading about near death experiences and the afterlife and going to medium readings, right? Time and again, I found my experiences were validated. And I moved from a place of believing that my son was still here in a different way, right? To knowing it. And that didn't take my grief away. That didn't fix it, right? Grief is part of the human experience. But I did realize that some of the ways I was grieving no longer felt authentic to me anymore. And so ruminating on the idea that he was gone, that didn't fit. If he was standing right beside me here, present in my life, I wanted to change the way that I interacted with him. So I did. And people will think I'm crazy, but I have full blown conversations with my son, usually in my head, in exactly the same way that I would have when he was here physically standing beside me. The moment that I started doing that, I felt like our connection grew and I was more in tune to the signs. And I found that nurturing that relationship, just like any other relationship in my life, was really important. Our bond continues. And because of that, I bring him forward with me, right? I'm not living without him. I'm living with him. I'm just doing it in a different way. And when I gave myself permission to believe and live my truth without worrying about how it looked to everyone else, things changed. And I mark that as the point in my journey when it changed from being a grief journey into a healing journey. Healing is one of those words that most people don't like to hear associated with grief. I know because I was one of those people. I've found that over the years, my entire definition of healing has changed. And when it did, that perspective shift really helped me. Things started to make sense. Healing for me isn't a destination. like we've been taught to think. It's really a daily practice. It's not that broken bone that takes 6 to 8 weeks and then you can walk on it again with just a little physical therapy, right? And you're good. It's not that cut that you put a Band-Aid on and it goes away and you never think about it again. Grief is one of those things we don't fix, but there are things in this experience that we can heal, right? And by doing that, we do create a space where we can show up just a little bit differently. And that's the work, right? The things that we can heal inside of this. Being on a healing journey for me, it's really about setting the daily expectation or the daily intention, that's a better word, to do the things that help me most, to have compassion for myself in the moments that I can't do the things that I want to do or should do, and maintaining that bond with my son. So give yourself permission to explore things, everything that you need to do in order to get to that place where you can live again. I talk about that as the place where grief and life sort of come together and coexist. And is a really powerful word. You can literally bring together two very competing things. Even though it doesn't seem like you should be able to, you can. And so figuring out how to do that, figuring out how to live and carry grief at the same time, it all comes down to building a life that we can live, that we can show up for. And if you want to do that for yourself, either now or someday in the future, if you're in a place where you want to find the things that can help you, reach out to me. That's what I do. That's what I love to do, is help people do that, really find a way forward. It doesn't mean we forget our child. We don't leave them in the past. We don't move on. We don't get over it. Any of those other things, right? We find a way to integrate this loss into who we are now, who we're becoming. We learn to carry this grief in the best way possible, and we move forward with our child. So I want to pause here really quickly. I'm going to put a slide up here on the screen and just do a really quick recap. I want you guys to be able to see all of the things that are really important that I mentioned today. So I said there's not just one thing, right? There's a lot of things. And so number one, I want you to know that you can do this. You already are doing this. And I know a lot of times we don't remember that. We don't feel that. It feels impossible. But you can and you are. Number two, child loss is trauma. I don't know why this isn't common knowledge and why people don't know this, but it is an emotional injury to your brain. Brain function has changed. You need to learn how to have that compassion for yourself. Be kind to yourself, right? Everything you're feeling makes sense. Number three, there are things that can help you. It's normal to have no idea where to start and to feel like you're beyond help, right? Or there's nothing that can be done. I promise you, with the right tools, things can change, things can shift. There is choice in this, and it might not feel like it. You might not be in a place where you can recognize you have choice, and that's okay. When you are ready, when you have the right support, choice will open itself up for you. Number five, there is no wrong way to grieve, right? Unless you're avoiding it and not doing it, there's no wrong way. And society is grief illiterate, right? The things people say and do, they're not always done, in a way that's meant to harm us. And so a lot of it is toxic. It's been conditioned into us. We just need to recognize that the world is not taught the right thing, and every should that we hear is a stop sign. Number seven, self-care is so much bigger and it's so critical in this. And so I want you to start to reconnect with yourself, figure out what you need in this exact moment, and then practice choosing that. And when you can't, you have to have compassion for yourself. Number eight, our children still exist. They are not gone. Our bonds continue. Don't be afraid to explore your beliefs in this area. I know it feels crazy, but I know that my son is still very present in life. And while I much prefer him to be here physically, and I would give up everything to have that, that's not possible, right? So instead, I choose to find him in the way that he is now and try to maintain that bond. Number nine, You're not alone. I get it. This is really the biggest one that I want you to keep remembering. And when everyone else in your life feels like they are taking a step back, right? I know that can feel really lonely. I want you to know that you can reach out, you can find people, go out and seek help. Asking for help, that is really the bravest thing that you can ever do. Um, and then what I'm going to do, let me pull up my last slide here. This is how you can contact me. This is how you can find me after today. My email address is there. Use it. I'm happy to respond. I'm happy to point you in the right direction. I've got a link here to my Facebook page. I share a lot of my own journey there. I share signs that I get from my son. I also put anything out there that resonates for me in terms of how we do this, how we live after the loss of our child. And then there's a link here for free resources. And I have a bunch of them on my site, different workshops that are available that you can go in and do on demand. I have a newsletter list. So I send weekly emails with encouragement and other tips. Go out and sign up for that, right? Get those emails. And like I said, start exploring. Just give yourself that permission to see what works for you, see what helps. I will open this up. I know we've only got a couple minutes here, but if there are any questions, feel free to put those questions in the chat. I just want to say thank you to everybody for tuning in. I wish you all the best in this journey. I hope when you walk away from this hour, you've got a lot of things in here that can help you, that help sort of move you in that right direction. So thank you guys so much.